at this point, at least, the hospitalization rates are still not very high. What would you say would be what you are most concerned about in the current scenario?
Thank you. This is what was expected in the Omicron-led surge. One, that cases would rise rapidly. Two, that test positivity rate would be high. This could go up to as high as 20 to 30% if the South African experience is anything to go by. And third, that overall hospitalizations will remain low. And therefore, the consensus that's gradually emerging among experts is that we should really be watching and tracking hospitalization, including severe cases, how many are requiring oxygen, etc., rather than be governed by the rise in new cases and test positivity rate alone. That's one of the new learnings in the Omicron phase.
Yes, absolutely. And at this point in time, the hospitalization, the severe cases are not very high, as we are seeing across the country in what's being reported. But going by what we've seen across the world, what we're seeing even in South Africa as well, how fast do you think this entire wave is going to peak at this point?
This is certainly going to rise very, very fast. But keeping track of that, keeping account of that is going to be a function of how much and how fast we are testing. Now, the other learning that's coming from this phase is that the RT-PCR tests, by their very nature, take some time, some turnaround time, and therefore the rapid tests are increasingly getting more useful in the Omicron phase. And that's the other thing to consider, how much of rapid antigen tests to bring into the program, plus the fact that we also need a certain community testing track in addition to hospital testing tracks. So if we are to keep track of numbers, some of these shifts will become necessary, and some of which are already underway. But if the South African experience is anything to go by, the next 2 to 4 weeks, cases are going to rise rapidly, if not dramatically.
Right. Dr. Dasgupta, like you pointed out that, of course, it is key to watch out for the hospitalizations, the severe cases. But even in those where the cases are mild or asymptomatic as well, would there be any points of concern? Because we have seen in the past a lot of people being affected by long-term effects as well, long COVID as well. How concerning would those things be?
That is an important question. The real thing to watch out for is not overall hospitalization numbers or rates, but really what's happening to the elderly age group, particularly 60 plus, and those with other comorbidities, which is pretty high in the Indian context, with relatively younger people having a fairly high prevalence of diabetes and hypertension and so on. So those really are the groups we ought to be watching for. Whether they're requiring more oxygen, whether they're requiring more hospitalization, and most importantly, whether any complications are happening in those groups. The overall low hospitalization rate would, at least in part, be explained by the young demographics of the country. But what's really happening to the elderly and the comorbid is something we need to keep track of.
Well, yes, absolutely, Dr. Dasgupta. There are some important points that you've mentioned as far as the situation right now is concerned. The other question also that I had at this point in terms of the vaccination drive, the pace at which it is going right now, and the further need to extend it to even the 12 to 15-year-old category as well.
2 points around these. Let me address the second question first. And this we have discussed several times earlier. As far as the below 18 age group goes, there are two very distinct segments, the 6 to 12 and the 12 to 18. The 12 to 18 is important because as far as COVID transmission goes, they behave more or less like adults. And therefore, the 15 to 18 age group, which is currently under way, that vaccination should sooner rather than later be extended to up to 12 years. But yes, we will roll out this program in a phased manner, and therefore we hope that the 12 to 18-year age group would be addressed soon enough. The 12 to 15-year additionally, that is. Secondly, to connect to your other question, as far as India goes, the first target for the government was to achieve anything between 90 to 100% coverage of the entire adult population with the first dose, which we have done reasonably well. The second task, therefore, is to have all of these adults complete their two-dose schedule, of which there is still some way to go. And as you're aware that from the 10th of January, the booster dose for the 60 years will roll out. However, even with a booster rollout, it will take another 2 weeks of those getting the booster to have the full protection that 3 doses can offer against the Omicron variant. But it is also a fact, as emerging from the global experience, that 3 doses of the COVID vaccine certainly cuts down hospitalization appreciably as compared to 2 doses.
Right. And one final question, Dr. Dasgupta, of course, how much of a concern do you believe is, this kind of rapid spread that we are seeing, even though the cases are mild, of newer variants developing? Because we do know that one new variant has been identified in France. Of course, data is still awaited. But the risk of these kind of variants further developing when the spread is so rapid?
Well, variants, as we know, will continue to emerge. To that extent, Omicron is a bit of a lucky exception because it's not affecting the lungs as much as the earlier variants did. That's because of some of the biological changes that it's undergone. And therefore, it's confined largely to the upper respiratory tract, which is also the reason why it's spreading so fast. But at the same time, it's not affecting the lungs or causing complicated disease as much as the earlier variants did. But that doesn't mean that all of these mutations will be as lucky as this, to the extent that this one perhaps is. And therefore, as all authorities have been emphasizing time and again, that a high alert will need to be maintained, that all COVID appropriate precautions will continue to need to be taken.
All right, Dr. Dasgupta, thank you so much for speaking to us and giving us your perspective on the situation at this point in time with regard to COVID in the country.